Hey guys, I'm Noxro and welcome to my Season 9 League of Legends Swain guide. This guide will have everything you need to help you improve at Swain and start climbing up the ranked ladder. This guide will include things like your pregame setup, matchups, combos, ability information, and how to effectively play throughout the game. Swain is a strong champion in the current meta that you can find in every single lane. He dishes out some decent damage, has some solid sustain when he has his ultimate, and is a fairly strong team fighter. He's a great champion to have in your champion pool because if your team ends up drafting a full attack damage based team comp, you can always add Swain in for some magic damage into any lane. If you guys do enjoy this guide, please drop a like and subscribe to help support the channel. Swain is a champion that brings a lot of AoE damage into his team comp. A Swain that's able to get into the middle of a team fight can explode with his ultimate for some massive AoE damage and set his team up for success. He's also got some relatively high sustain when doing so he's not going to be that easy for the enemy to take down. Swain also has a strong root and pulling ability from his E and a decent slow from his W, so he brings multiple crowd controls for his team as well. If he's able to land them consistently during the game, he'll have a very strong game and ganking will be incredibly easy for his jungler. Finally, he's also got a very strong lane phase, at least in most matchups, especially in the top lane. He'll be able to abuse the majority of melee champions throughout the lane phase and should have a rather easy time. Although he is a fairly strong champion, he still does have his weaknesses. He is a fairly immobile champion, which can pose a very big problem for you, especially in top lane. The lane is very long when you compare it to mid lane, and if you're pushed too far forward, you'll usually end up dying if the enemy jungler makes an appearance. Make sure that if you are pushing your lane that you drop a ward in the river and back up when you need to. Swain also has a fairly small range on his Q ability. This can be a very strong ability for harassing when you are against those melee champions, but when you are against a longer range mage like Xerath or Lux, it feels kind of useless because you'll be at a very big range disadvantage. Poke with it when you can, but make sure to show some respect to those longer range champions and don't get caught in their crowd control. Swain does rely on his sustain as well, which means he will be weaker when he's ignited or he does have grievous wounds applied on him. Keep track of ignite cooldowns as well as Morellonomicon and Mortal Reminders so it doesn't catch you off guard. For your runes, you have a lot of different options on Swain. You'll first have to decide what keystone you want to go for on Swain. Phase Rush, Electrocute, and Grasp of the Undying are all incredibly strong on him. All of these shine in different scenarios as well, so you'll have to get used to what you want to take against each champion. For our first rune page though, we go into Sorcery and Inspiration, grabbing Phase Rush as our keystone. This would be the default page on Swain and can shine in almost all matchups. Phase Rush is very strong on Swain because he is a champion that lacks mobility. With this keystone, when you hit an enemy champion with 3 separate abilities or attacks, you'll gain movement speed. This will allow you to move through team fights so you can get off your area of effect damage, making you a massive team fight threat that the enemy has to try to deal with. I then pick up Nimbus Cloak as well so you get movement speed whenever you cast your ultimate. This will help you close the gap on enemies to get into position so you can get off some damage and get more movement speed from Phase Rush. Transcendence is what I like to grab next because you'll be granted 10% cooldown reduction at level 10. This will also convert any cooldown reduction above the cap into extra ability power as well, so you don't have to worry too much if you do go over 40%. Then finish up Sorcery by grabbing Scorch. This makes enemies burn for 10 seconds when hit, which allows you to do just a little bit more harassment. This will make you even more of a lane bully, and champions will struggle even more at making it through alive. I then move into Inspiration and first grab Perfect Timing. This is very solid on Swain because you'll get a free stopwatch which can put you into stasis and acts like Azonia's Hourglass. This item is very strong in general, but it's even better on Swain because you can use it during your ultimate and keep doing damage and regaining health. Then you want to grab Cosmic Insight to get 5% cooldown reduction, max cooldown reduction, and summoner spell cooldown reduction as well. This just allows you to use your abilities and summoner spells just a little bit more often throughout the game, which is obviously a very nice thing to have. For our next rune page, we go for Domination and Sorcery and pick up Electrocute as our keystone. This will be the page you want to grab if you're looking to add a bit more burst damage into your combos and you're against a squishy laner. Electrocute is also a very strong keystone as well because when you hit an enemy champion with 3 separate attacks or abilities in 3 seconds, you'll deal extra bonus damage. Basically, all that means is when you hit an enemy with a combo and it's off cooldown, you'll deal more burst damage. You won't have the added mobility from Phase Rush, but instead you'll have that extra burst. Like I said before, this is something you will want to consider taking if you are against a very squishy laner, say Teemo for example. You'll then want to follow up by next grabbing Cheap Shot. This adds bonus true damage whenever you hit an enemy that does have impaired movement. This works great on Swain because you have impairment in both your E and W abilities, so it's fairly easy to get off and you can add a bunch of damage throughout a game. Then pick up Eyeball Collection, which will give you permanent ability power on champion takedowns. The ability does stack and you can pick them up even from assists. So even if you hit an enemy very far away from you with your W and they do end up dying, you'll be rewarded with a stack and get some additional ability power. Finish up Domination by then grabbing Ravenous Hunter. Takedowns will give you permanent healing from ability damage, which will give Swain even more sustain than he already has. When combined with your ultimate, you'll be receiving some pretty decent healing and should be hard to bring down unless of course Grievous Wounds is applied. We then move into sorcery and like our first page, pick up Nimbus Cloak and Transcendence. Like I mentioned there, Nimbus Cloak is excellent on Swain because you will receive movement speed whenever you cast your ultimate, and Transcendence gives you 10% CDR at level 10, which is great. For the last rune page, we go for Resolve and Sorcery, grabbing Grasp of the Undying as our keystone. This is the page you're going to want to take if you want to focus more on sustain and tankiness. Grasp of the Undying is an excellent keystone on Swain because it's fairly easy to proc and will give you some nice sustain, max health, and also deals bonus magic damage. This is pretty much everything you need on Swain and can make the lane phase a lot easier in some tough matchups. Later on in the game, you'll be even tankier than normal, which will allow you to stay in the middle of those team fights and deal your AoE damage. I then like to move on and grab Demolish as my next rune. Since Swain will usually be bullying his enemy with this rune page, you'll end up shoving them under tower most of the time. This rune allows you to charge up a powerful attack against that tower, which will do a large chunk of damage and make taking down tower plates even easier. These of course will give you additional gold, allowing you to get a big lead over your opponent. I then like to take Bone Plating for some added tankiness. After taking damage from an enemy champion, the next 3 spells or attacks against you will be reduced. This is really nice when it's off cooldown because you'll take a lot less damage in trades and usually win them rather easily whenever you have it. Therefore, whenever it is available, you'll probably want to trade aggressively. Then finish up Resolve by grabbing Overgrowth. This gives Swain permanent maximum health when minions or monsters die near you, so you'll have an even higher health pool, making you harder to bring down. Like in the previous rune pages, you go into Sorcery next and grab Nimbus Cloak and Transcendence. I already covered these twice, so basically really quickly, Nimbus Cloak gives you added movement speed when you cast your ultimate, and Transcendence 10% CDR at level 10. For our summoner spells, we have a couple different options. In all scenarios, however, you first want to pick up Flash. Swain is a champion that doesn't have a lot of mobility outside of Phase Rush if he's taken it, and Nimbus Cloak. Therefore, you'll always be able to use your Flash to escape to safety if you're in a bad situation, or you could always use it offensively as well to jump into the middle and get off some AoE damage. It's an extremely strong summoner spell in general, and you'll always have to take it on Swain. For your second summoner spell, we do have a bunch of different options, and first is Teleport. Yet again, Swain doesn't have the best mobility, so you can use this to just gank lanes, join your team for objectives, or to just even get back to your lane if you do need to. If you're instead looking for added kill pressure, you could always take Ignite. It's very strong if you're not too worried about having to move around the map and instead want to focus on killing your lane opponent to get snowballing. It'll deal some really nice added damage and can sometimes be the difference between an enemy escaping or dying. One final option would be Heal. This is a really strong summoner spell if you instead want a defensive option. You can activate it to gain some additional health and a short boost of movement speed that you can use to escape or chase enemies. If you are playing Swain in the AD carry role, then I would suggest taking Heal as your summoner, otherwise you probably want Teleport or Ignite. Before we get into some of Swain's gameplay, let's first look at his abilities. His passive Ravenous Flock allows him to gain soul fragments from immobilized enemy champions that deals magic damage and pulls enemies towards him. His Ravens will also bring in soul fragments to heal him and restore mana. Each of these soul fragments collected also increases his maximum health by 5. This passive is where you get a lot of additional crowd control as well as some pretty decent sustain. Your Q ability Death's Hand releases 5 bolts of energy in the target direction that deals magic damage to enemies in a cone. Enemies can be hit by multiple and will take bonus damage when this happens. This ability is really great at harassing your opponent and also farming minion waves. The bolts don't get stopped short unless you hit an enemy champion, so you can hit a full minion wave, making farming rather easy. You will want to poke enemies as much as you can with this ability since it is a large portion of your damage, but keep in mind the range isn't that big. Your W ability, Vision of Empire, will reveal and deal damage to enemies within after 1.5 seconds. It has a 3500 range, so it can be used from a very long distance and will also slow targets hit for 2.5 seconds. This can help your allies when you're not even nearby, and you'll want to use this to check brush as you move around the map to make sure you are safe and enemies aren't waiting to cheese you from inside. Your E ability is Nevermore, and this is one of your main ways of crowd controlling your enemies. You'll shoot out a wave in the target direction and deal damage to enemies it passes through. When it reaches max distance, it will return to Swain and detonate at the first enemy hit. This will deal magic damage and also root them for 1.5 seconds. You can combo your W ability very effectively with this one since the root lasts 1.5 seconds, which is the exact time it takes Vision of Empire to detonate and do its damage and slow. Then finally, we have your ultimate, Demonic Ascension. When activated, you'll free the demons within for 12 seconds and gain health based off of your soul fragments. When active, you'll drain all enemies around you each second, dealing magic damage and healing yourself. You can always end this effect early to cast Demon Flare, otherwise it will automatically cast after 12 seconds. This second part will release a Nova of energy and deal magic damage to nearby enemies, which factors in 75% of their health drained during Demonic Ascension. This will give it some insane damage potential. If you're in the middle of a team fight for 12 seconds draining multiple enemies, this will explode and do some massive damage and can one-shot squishier targets. For your skill order, you first want to put a point into your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11, and 16. Then focus on maxing your Q ability first. This is your main source of damage and will help you bully your lane opponent. Then next, you want to focus on maxing your E ability second. This will allow you to shoot it out more often, and if it does land, you can follow up with the rest of your kit for a full combo. This of course means you will have to max your W ability last, but you do want to take a point early on in the ability so you can combo with your E and slow enemies from a very long distance. For our first combo, we have your main trading combo. To pull off this combo, you'll first want to land your E ability on the target to root them. Right click to pull the target in with your passive and cast your W ability at the same time so it detonates on them when they're being pulled into it and still rooted. Then follow up with your Q and your auto attack to finish off the rest of your kit and do as much damage as possible. For your next combo, we simply switch your W and E. This combo you'll want to do if the enemy is too far away from you to pull in with your E. Slow the enemy from range with your W and then land your root and pull in the target with your E ability and add the damage from your Q for burst damage. This combo is a little riskier because your W isn't guaranteed to land. Your ultimate can always be activated after either one of these combos as well if you are going for an all-in. And for the last combo, we incorporate Flash in case your E ability was going to miss. Start by casting your E ability, and if the enemy isn't in the path, you can always flash to move them into it. Then follow up by landing your W and your Q abilities like we did in the first combo. This combo here isn't recommended unless your E will for sure miss your target since it does use your flash, which is a rather important cooldown. In this section, I'm going to cover a bunch of the most common matchups you'll see in today's meta. Since Swain can be played in all three lanes, he does have a ton of different matchups, and instead of going through 100 plus champions, I'll just touch on the ones you're most likely to see. First, I'm going to cover his easier matchups, and first is Akali. She's a champion that gives lots of other champions a lot of trouble, but she's not going to be too much of an issue for Swain. He will be rather tanky, so she shouldn't be able to burst you down easily unless she's roamed and started snowballing. A lot of your damage is also AoE based, so even if she's in her shroud, she won't be safe from your damage because you can do it on top of her. Pantheon has just recently got reworked, and at the moment he's very subpar in my opinion. His damage shouldn't be that hard to deal with, but if you are struggling for some reason, you can always pick up Ninja Tabis. Just focus on farming and poking him with your Q ability as much as possible because Pantheon does not have any built-in sustain, and it's going to be very hard for him to deal with. Teemo is a champion that's a nuisance for most champions out there, but not for Swain. He deals a lot of harassment in most matchups, but his range is even shorter than yours and he's a lot squishier, so it should be pretty easy to land your abilities and combo onto him and do a big chunk of damage. Bully him as much as you can during the lane phase because if you were playing a different champion, he'd end up doing the same to you. Yasuo is another champion most people hate playing against, but shouldn't be that big of a problem for Swain. Just be careful when you are going for combos, because if there is some minions nearby, he can always dash to them to try to dodge your skill shots and then trade with you afterwards. Only use your abilities when you'll know they'll land and combo on top of them to destroy him. Pick up some ninja tabis and take Grasp of the Undying if you do struggle against him, just to make things a bit easier. Now let's move on to some medium matchups, and first up is Aatrox. He's a champion that's fairly strong right now, but he is fairly clunky. Play around the cooldown of his E ability because it is rather long and he won't be able to dodge when it is on cooldown. Play safe if you do need to, because his kit is kind of overloaded, and if he can pull off a full combo on you, you're in big trouble. Ahri is a champion with a lot of mobility post level 6, and she's fairly annoying to deal with. Her Q ability also has a decent range, but it is fairly dodgeable, so avoid it and her charm as much as you can. Once you know that they're down, it'll be a lot safer to go in for your combos. If you can pull off a full combo, she is a very squishy champion, so you'll win the trade very easily. Darius is a matchup that could end up going either way. He doesn't have much mobility, so you'll want to try to abuse him with your damage as much as you can early in the lane phase. He will become pretty troublesome if he does take his ghost, however, because if he pops it, he can easily run you down. Therefore, if he has taken Ghost and has it available, don't overextend, because if he all-ins you, you're probably not making it out alive. Fizz is another matchup that you want to be very aggressive in at the start. He is just a squishy melee champion at the beginning, but becomes an all-in threat once he hits level 6. Use your strong early game to try and get an advantage on him early on, and get the parts of your Rod of Ages to become tanky, making it harder for him to all-in you. Play carefully when he's 6, because he's going to look to combo you with his ultimate. Katarina is a champion that can dish out a lot of damage really quickly, so don't let it catch you off guard. Avoid going near her daggers as much as you can, because she can jump on top of them and do some AoE damage. As long as you're doing this and poking her when she farms with her melee auto attacks, it shouldn't be that hard of a matchup. Also, respect her all-in potential when she's level 6 and has her ult. Mordekaiser's a fairly immobile champion, so you'll want to poke him with your abilities and auto attacks early on. You will need to be careful of his pull ability, however, because if he pulls you into him, he does have some really high burst damage. He can also pull you into a realm when he's level 6 to 1v1 you, so be very careful when he has his ultimate, because you can't escape. 1v1ing a Mordekaiser in melee range is a very hard thing for Swain to do, so try to not be too overextended. Nasus is a champion that's very weak early on in the game, so try to harass him and deny as much farm as you can. He does have built-in sustain from his passive, however, so he'll try to last hit minions and gain some health back at the same time. If he gets into the mid and late game with a highly stacked Q, your team will be in a lot of trouble, so do everything you can to deny him minions and set him behind. Sylas is a very tricky matchup depending on the ultimates he's able to steal throughout the game. He has some okay mobility in lane and will try to dodge your skill shots, so hold on to them if you need to. Also, he does have some really high healing when below 40% health, so don't get baited by it. Pay attention to the ultimates he has stolen, because he can do some crazy things depending on what he has available. Veigar is a champion that has infinite scaling from his Q ability, just like Nasus, so you'll want to try to deny whatever you can. He's not going to have a lot of kill pressure on you early, so try to bully him, and if you need to, shove him under tower to make last hitting and stacking his Q even harder. He will be a bigger threat later on in the game when he has stacks and ability power, because he can one-shot a lot of different champions and has some pretty decent crowd control from his counterplay box. Zed is an assassin with a lot of all-in potential. If he's doing somewhat decently in the game, you'll probably want to pick up some ninja tabis to help deal with his damage. Dodge his shurikens as much as possible and be very safe when he has his ultimate available. You may want to consider going for an early Zhonya's Hourglass against him, so you can go into stasis whenever he casts his ultimate to avoid dying. Moving on, we've got your hard matchups, and first up is Diana. She has some very high burst damage and it can catch you off guard rather easily. She's very weak until she does get her ultimate, so try and bully her and shut her down so she struggles to get her first items. Dodge her Crescent Strike as much as you can, because if it does land and she has her ultimate, she can use it to jump on you multiple times, and even if you are in your own ultimate, it's still hard to live. Fiora is a matchup that can be very hard if she's good at using her riposte. She can use this ability to block your crowd control and stun you instead. If she's able to do this, she can activate her ultimate to increase her damage and also give her a ton of sustain. Therefore, try your best to bait out riposte before going for all-ins, and avoid getting hit by it at all costs, otherwise you're in for a very bad time. Garen is a fairly easy to play champion that's going to try to run Swain down throughout the game. He gets a bunch of movement speed and will also silence you when he gets there, so you can't even try to outplay him. In this matchup, you just want to play safely and farm as much as you can and poke him with your Q. He's not much of a late game threat, so you don't have to really worry about him outscaling you or hard winning lane. Jax is a hard matchup because he's got some fairly high damage when he acquires a few items, some decent mobility, a crowd control, and he's fairly tanky. He's not very strong early on in the game though, so you'll want to try to set him as far back as you can because he will be a nightmare later on. He's a very strong split pusher later on in the game, and most likely nobody on your team will be able to stop him, so don't let him get to that point in the game with his items. Lux is a fairly hard matchup in the mid lane because of her range. She can play very safely with her range advantage, and if she can land her abilities on you at the same time, she has some pretty solid burst. Swain is a champion that likes to try to get a lead heading into the mid game to abuse other champions, and against Lux this will be very hard, and I think it is the main reason his win rate is pretty bad against her. Lastly, we've got one of the biggest bullies in the top lane, Renekton. Against this Gator, you're going to have to play very safely because his mobility is pretty solid when there's minions nearby, and his damage early is nuts. Keep at a distance from him as much as you can and pick up farm whenever possible. Just like Garen, he's not going to be the biggest late game threat, so you don't have to worry about him hard out scaling you. It's not going to be the end of the world. Just don't let him snowball at all costs. During the early game, you'll first want to focus on farming. You'll almost always want to get a Rod of the Ages as your first item, and since it does take a while to stack, it's important to get it as quickly as you can. You can combine your Q and E abilities together to quickly take out minion waves, but this will be rather hard on your mana, especially in the early game, so be careful when doing it rather often. In most situations, you'll also want to try and not push the minion wave, so focus on last hitting minions. It will make it easier to get the gold from minions and make the minion wave push less. When not last hitting a minion, you'll also want to try and harass your opponent. This is a lot easier against melee champions because they'll have no choice but to move into the minion wave to get their gold. Use your auto attacks and your Q ability to poke the enemy as much as possible without sacrificing farm. You can always combine your other abilities as well to do a full combo for even more damage, but be careful if the enemy has mobility because if they dodge, they may engage instead and easily win a trade while yours are on cooldown. Although Swain doesn't have much mobility, he can always look to roam as well. This is best done when you're shoving the enemy under tower and have time to help someone else without losing a minion wave. Even just using your W ability from range to help slow enemies for other lanes can sometimes be enough to help them either escape or get a kill. If you know for certain that the enemy is roaming, you most likely will want to follow behind them as long as you know it's safe to make sure there's not a numbers disadvantage in the lane that they're roaming to. A lot of the mid game is about grabbing objectives to try to get an advantage over the enemy. This could be towers, dragons, Rift Herald, Baron, or inhibitors. These will usually be pretty contested however, so it's best to take them when you know you have an advantage. Follow up on teamfight wins with an objective to get an even bigger lead over your enemy. Any time where the enemy is weaker than you, you should be looking to get objectives to extend that lead. If your team is behind, it's usually best to get some wards into your jungle and try to stall the game. Safely farm and push lanes with any vision you have, but don't get caught out or you can end up losing even more since the enemy can probably get a free objective. Although unlikely, you can always try to steal any objectives as well if the enemy does go for them with your W, since it does have that 3500 range and you will be pretty safe. If your team is instead ahead, make the lead even bigger. Like I said before, focus on objectives because even if the enemy contests you, you should end up winning. Baron is of course an exception because it does deal a lot of damage, and if the enemy collapses on you when you're low, GG, Baron throw. You'll also want to take as much of the enemy jungle as you can at this time as well. Reduce as much of the income they can get as possible to avoid them getting back or catching up. In late game teamfights, you should have acquired a bunch of your items and be a fairly tanky champion that should dish out some decent area of effect damage. Usually you'll want to try to get into the middle of a fight to deal as much area of effect as you can. If you do end up dipping low, you can always consider using your Zhonya's Hourglass if you do have one to stop taking damage and keep gaining health as long as you do have that ultimate already active. Keep in mind that you do have some pretty decent crowd control as well, so if you see a high damage enemy carry on your backline, you can always try to get them off with your pull as well. To win and close out the game, destroy the enemy nexus. In all seriousness though, you'll want to keep taking objectives and look for an opportunity to get Baron. If possible, take down a few enemy inhibitors beforehand after previously won teamfights so super minions will roll into their base and they won't be able to contest the Baron. This will hopefully get you a free Baron, but you want to make sure you drop a control ward in the pit beforehand anyways, just in case they have any abilities that can steal it. Their base and nexus will obviously be a lot easier to take when you have Baroned up super minions rolling in. For your items, you'll first want to start with Doran's Ring and health potions. This is a very strong start that will make last hitting easier, give you more health, and return mana whenever you kill minions. You'll want to try and farm the lane until you have at least 1100 gold so you can go back and buy a Catalyst of Aeons. This will increase your health and mana pool and make you more durable, but also restore a bunch of each whenever you level, making your lane phase even stronger. If you do have to back early however, you could always just end up picking up your Boots of Speed and a refillable potion. This will be nice because you won't have to buy additional health potions at any point in the game, and you'll have some added movement speed from your boots. Even though this is a decent buy early on, you still want to try and save up for your Catalyst of Aeons whenever you can. For your first major item, you want to turn that Catalyst into a Rod of Ages. This will give you some nice health and mana, ability power, and also stacks over 10 minutes, giving you more of each. 15% of damage taken from champions will also be returned to you as mana, which can give you a ton of extra mana throughout a game. Mana used will also be returned to you as health, which gives you solid sustain at the same time. All around, this is a very strong item in the lane phase. Next, you want to get some upgraded boots, and first we have the Sorcerer's Shoes. These are great on Swain because you'll get some magic penetration so you can cut through some of the enemy's magic resist and increase your damage. In situations where you are in a hard matchup against attack damage based champions, you may want to consider getting some Ninja Tabbies. This will help mitigate a lot of their damage and make you much more durable against them. If instead you were in a hard magic damage based matchup, or if the enemy team had a lot of crowd control, you could instead go for Mercury's Treads. This would be nice in those scenarios, but you should look for Sorcerer's Shoes whenever you can. Once you've got your Rod of Ages and your upgraded boots, you'll then want to pick up Azonia's Hourglass. This is a very solid defensive item that can make you go into stasis for 2.5 seconds, making you invulnerable for that duration. If the enemy team seemed rather easy, you could pick this item up later, but generally I like to grab it right after the Rod. Next, you'll want to choose either a Morellonomicon or a Liandry's Torment. Morellonomicon is what I like to default to because it gives ability power, health, and even more magic penetration. When combined with Sorcerer's Shoes, you'll cut through a fair bit of the enemy's magic resist, and your damage will be pretty hard to deal with even if they have some MR. This item will also make your abilities apply grievous wounds as well for 3 seconds, greatly reducing their healing received. It's going to be required in the mid game against champions who do abuse healing, even if it's just a strong AD carry who has Blade of the Ruined King or a Bloodthirster. So next you want to pick up that Liandry's Torment. This gives more health and ability power, but also increases your damage by up to 10% as long as you've been in combat for at least 5 seconds, which works great with your ultimate. Spells will also burn targets for 3 seconds based on their maximum health, so it's fantastic against tankier champions. This covers his main build, and our next items are all situational and should be picked up after you acquire these core items. If at any point you were snowballing, you could always pick up a Magi Soul Stealer. This is an item that gives stacking ability power, but stacks are cut in half if you do end up dying. It can be great when you're insanely strong, but there is a risk to the item and it will be weakened if you die. One alternative to the Morellonomicon and Liandry's Torment is the Luden's Echo. This can be a decent item if you want more cooldown reduction early and increased movement speed and burst damage. I prefer having the health from the other items, however, because I like to be in the middle of team fights and therefore I rarely build a Luden's Echo. If the enemy team is stacking a ton of magic resist, you may want to purchase a Void Staff in the late game. It'll give you a high percent of magic penetration, so you'll be able to ignore a lot of magic resist whenever you're against one of the champions that are stacking it. If you want to go for full-on offensive damage, you want to pick up a Rabadon's Death Cap. This will give you 120 ability power, but also increase all of your ability power by an additional 40%. Therefore, if you're looking to do as much damage as possible, you will want to pick up a Rabadon's Death Cap to get a ton of ability power in just one item. Rylai's Crystal Scepter can be a fairly strong buy for Swain as well, since it increases his health pool, gives ability power, and can also slow enemies hit by your spells. Since you have a lot of AoE damage, this can slow multiple enemies at the same time so you can keep on top of them, and your squishy carries will have an easier time kiting. For some defensive items, we first have the Banshee's Veil. This item also gives you health and mana, but also 10% cooldown reduction and blocks a spell every 40 seconds. This can be a great buy against champions like Fizz who are looking to engage from a distance with their ultimate. This will change the way these champions have to play since they have to break the shield beforehand. If you're looking for some magic resist and to increase your healing, Spirit Visage is a great item. All of your healing will be increased by 30%, and since Swain has a lot of healing, this item is pretty fantastic. You will be a lot tankier in the process as well because of the 55 magic resist and 450 health. For one final item, we have the Abyssal Mask. This is another solid item against teams with high magic damage since it gives 55 magic resist and some nice health. The item also makes nearby enemies take 15% more magic damage as well, so it has a great offensive use at the same time and works great on Swain because it'll be right near enemies. And that covers everything for this guide. If this video helped you out, please make sure you give it a like, and if you're new here, also subscribe since there will be a lot more guides like this coming out in the future. Also, please let me know down in the comments as well what champion you guys would like to see next. But on that note, I'm Noxro, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.